Detour by Dottie Gravely, Chapter 4, New Scenery. The first new scenery was the ICU on the 8th floor. It was not my favorite place, but there were bright spots there. When the Dutch Christian, Corrie ten Boom, was in a concentration camp, she noticed those bright spots that lifted her spirits and got her through. Things like a daily visit from a meadowlark with its song. Just like Corrie ten Boom, I felt an identification with Jesus and the crucifixion about 4 a.m. one day. My nighttime nurse, a man, and a technician came to my bed to repair my hot wire. It carried a signal about my blood pressure so that it could be read at any time. I don't remember when it was first installed, but it ran horizontally through the skin of my right palm. The technician explained that I had loosened the wire when I reached up to brush my hair off my forehead. He placed my right hand, palm up, on a small plastic disc and proceeded to rethread the wire with a needle. First, he deadened the palm of my hand, or at least thought he did. Ouch, that hurt. He quickly stopped and withdrew the needle. Then he had an idea. He could begin the wire circuit from the angiogram incision in my right thigh, run the wire horizontally across my lower abdomen, and mount it on a small grid just above my diaper. He prepped me with a series of local shots to deaden any pain. Fortunately, this time I was sufficiently numb, but was aware of something like a nail gun shot, followed by a small explosion of something wet. Was that blood? I prayed, Lord, don't let them kill me. Never before have I ever identified so intimately with the horrors of what Jesus endured when his body was pierced so cruelly with nails without any medication. I clung to that identification until the procedure ended with a small grid attached to my abdomen. The day nurses checked on it each morning in ICU. No one explained why my blood pressure needed such intense monitoring. I had no history of high blood pressure. One day it was necessary to change my gown and bed sheets with me in the bed since I could not yet stand. The RN called for a nursing assistant to do the dirty work. He was a young Hispanic man, we'll call him Brandon, who couldn't speak Spanish, just English. It wouldn't have been painful except for that awful crick in my neck and the recent incision and stitches. Each turn from side to side caused terrific pain. I turned left, then right repeatedly as the gown, sheets, and diaper were replaced and I was bathed. To turn, I had to grip the rails of the bed and lift myself with my arms. Shoulder and neck muscles were useless and was screaming out, pain. Brandon and I got acquainted. I love Hispanic people. He said his grandmother could speak Spanish, but not his generation. He said Spanish is hard. Spanish is hard? Did he say that? He got this Spanish teacher's attention. No, it's not, I told him. Then I began explaining how Spanish has only one silent letter, H, and each vowel has only one sound. I didn't have time to mention that pluralization and syllable stress rules are so uniform that Spanish dictionaries don't require entries to provide examples. He caught on quickly to everything I said. I could see that he was a very intelligent man having to do this menial, disgusting work to pay his bills. He was taking further nursing classes part-time. I thought if I survived this, I'd like to start a school for young Hispanic people like Brandon to make them bilingual and more marketable. Maybe the whole experience so far, brain surgery, 4 a.m. hot wiring, humiliating grooming by a man, was similar to little Sammy Parakeet's time with a vacuum cleaner, bathtub, and hairdryer. I could relate to Sammy. I wondered if there was hidden pride in me that needed to be eliminated. If God thought so, I was all for it. But I was resolved to keep my song. God's ways are much higher than ours, Isaiah 55:9. Before the stroke, I occasionally entertained ambitions of being a guest speaker for a women's group to feature my book. If only I had some outstanding spiritual gift to attract ladies to the meetings, something that would wow everyone. But after my UAB humility baths, none of that mattered to me anymore. In fact, I saw in Ephesians 1:3 that I already had been blessed with every spiritual blessing and gift. God could make the right one to surface at the appropriate time if he chose to use me. And if he didn't choose to use me, that was his call, not mine. My stance was to lay in dust life's glory dead, following the pattern of George Matheson in his great hymn, O Love That Will Not Let Me Go. The routine of his life was also shattered when he began going blind and his fiancée ended their relationship. One day in ICU was especially difficult for me. I felt that I needed special prayer and asked God to send me a prayer warrior. About 20 minutes later, right into my room came my dear friend from my college days, my mentor, Diane Stevenson Fowler, mentioned in my autobiography. Her arrival within 20 minutes of my prayer meant that she had left home at least 40 minutes before I prayed. She lived an hour away near Tuscaloosa. Isaiah 65:24 says, Before thy call I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. God foresaw my need and set in motion one of his obedient ones to help. Today, Alan describes what this day was like from his perspective. All this was the low point, when Diane came and quietly prayed by your side, holding your hand at times for several hours. We were all aware that a spiritual, physical battle was going on for your very life. We owe an eternal debt to Diane and others who prayed. Diane's visit was so positive and uplifting. She reminded me that our mutual heroine, Corrie ten Boom, had survived the horrors of a Nazi concentration camp by reminding herself that Jesus had been stripped and executed. When she and her fellow prisoners were told to strip off their clothes, she obeyed and identified with Jesus. That account helped me when male nurses bathed me on 2 different occasions. My sister came down that same day. Did she fear losing her only sister? At times she had looked to me for advice, like a second mother. I never felt worthy or wise enough for her expectations. She had some time to get to know Diane better. I had often wished she could get better acquainted with Diane, who was like a second sister to me. God was doubly good to me that day. I asked Diane why she had decided to come. She explained that she had noticed on Facebook some dialogue between my family members and no one would be with me. She decided that I should not be alone in the ICU. The staff pulled me back up in bed when I slipped downward. The bed had to be kept at a 30-degree angle so my brain could drain. Often they gripped the back of my head near my stitches and tugged at me. My neck was so very sore. Once I cried out in pain when they repositioned me. Diane witnessed that. Sometimes the staff pulled me up with the mat under me. At that angle it was difficult to clear my throat, and I feared I would strangle in my own phlegm. Diane told me that her father was given morphine in the final days of his bout with cancer. He thought he saw elephants in the backyard. That information helped me because for a while I was seeing the inside of a truck hood every time I closed my eyes. I had zero interest in truck motors. Medication can mess with the mind. I deliberately stayed away from posting on Facebook because I did not trust my mental clarity at that time. On one of those low days, I asked a friend at church to post a spiritual warfare prayer request, Women's Ministry Facebook page. I also alerted my family to pray along those lines. Something just wasn't right there in the hospital. Charles told me later that he read Psalms 41 that day, outlining the spiritual struggles of a sick person. It had never occurred to me that someone down in a sick bed would be the target of an attack from the devil. Then I remembered that he's not a nice devil. Allison reminded me that her tremendous church choir at Central Baptist Church in Dunn, North Carolina sometimes sings Psalm 41. She sang some of it for me. Oh yes, I remembered it. I was there when they once did that song. See, Thou, O Lord, YouTube, Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. The verses are in minor chords, sounding like a dirge. Then the chorus breaks out into triumphant major music by using Psalms 3:3 for its refrain. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory and the lifter of my head. Things became better soon. Allison had made the journey back down from North Carolina to Alabama alone, stopping overnight with old University of Alabama Chi Alpha friends. At our request, she went by our house and brought our laptop. It was a lifeline. One morning, I got a new, cheerful nurse. We'll call her Jill. She said, "I heard you mention Jesus. Let's talk about Jesus." I answered, "Oh, yes. I love to talk about Jesus. Tell me your Jesus story. I love to hear testimonies." Then she shared with me how someone there at UAB had shared the good news with her that she could have her sins forgiven and receive the gift of eternal life already provided for her long ago on a bloody cross. She turned from addictions and got involved in a strong local church. She got to meet two of my brothers, Rule and Bobby. The brothers volunteered to stay with me at night after some phone calls and or emails from my sister Judy. Although he was able to spend 3 nights in ICU, Alan was having some health issues of his own and needed his rest at night. Lewis's family knew about some inexpensive Baptist apartments for families of UAB patients in extended care. Alan stayed there nights and reported in as soon as possible the next day. We soon discovered that patients thrive better with family on hand to advocate and assist in small requests. My sister Judy got busy from the Chattanooga area and set up a schedule for my brothers to drive down from North Alabama, an hour away, to stay in the room at night. I notified the nurses in advance of my guests who were coming one at a time. For simplicity, I just referred to them as brother number 3, 5, 1, and 2. My first sitter was brother number 3, Ralph. We got to talk in the night and continued an old conversation from the 1970s. In a large family, there is so little one-on-one time to get to chat. Poor Ralph didn't get much rest. There were numerous interruptions in our sleep, and his little sister had become a chatterbox since the stroke. Ralph did a tour of duty in Vietnam. When he was there, I donated blood to the Red Cross. That was a huge contribution to the war effort for skinny, anemic me. I haven't given blood since. I also wrote that lonely soldier, and he wrote me back, filling his letters with jokes and cute remarks. I made a scrapbook of his observations and comments about Vietnam. When Ralph first appeared outside my room at UAB, I saw him looking at the room number and then looking lost. I called out with as much volume as I could, "Ralph! Ralph!" He later explained that he looked into my room and thought, "Nobody that's my sister's in there. Oh dear, did I look that bad?" Later, I downloaded a mirror on my phone to see myself. The image reminded me of an older aunt from years ago. No wonder Ralph didn't recognize me. Brother number 2, Rule, was scheduled for the following night. He loves music and loves to sing. He asked me if I knew how our granddaddy Harris became a Christian. Yes, I knew. He was the sharecropper from the next county who never attended church. My mother was able, as a one-room school teacher, to purchase land and provide a small farm for her parents. They did not need to do any more sharecropping. But one year, Granddaddy and Grandmother decided to try it one more time. This time, the landlord was a preacher. He was instrumental in leading Granddaddy into knowing for sure that he had settled the sin issue with God one happy day. I still remembered hearing him sing his 2 favorite hymns as he strolled down the country road between his home and ours. One song was, "An Old Account Was Settled." The other song was, "Oh Happy Day." I recorded the study on Rule's phone so that his children could hear it later. Rule didn't get much sleep either. During his visit, one of my nieces surprised me with a visit. She was returning to North Alabama from a job interview further down the interstate. Rule knew who she was, but I didn't. At age 6, she had been my flower girl in my wedding, but I had not seen her for a good while except on Facebook photos. Finally, I figured out her identity. She looked sharp in her interview clothes. I mentioned to Nurse Jill that Rule's daughter would be attending UAB classes in the fall with a full scholarship. As a young freshman, I hoped she would connect to some strong, older Christians. There was no Chi Alpha chapter there. Because I saw potential in Jill, I asked her bluntly, "Do you ever mentor younger women?" Caught off guard, she stammered, "Yeah, I guess so." The next day, the first thing she told me was that actually she had been thinking and praying about mentoring. She had thought a lot about my question. Hopefully that little push had good effect. Even the great 18th century evangelist George Whitefield dropped his words of exhortation as opportunity presented itself. He asks us, who would but drop a word for God whenever opportunity offers? Who would but shoot an arrow at a venture? God may direct it between the joints and the harness of a poor sinner's heart. 1 Kings 22:34 and 2 Chronicles 18:33. Perhaps Nurse Jill was the answer to those spiritual warfare prayers going up for me. Sometimes I was taken from my room for tests during the night or day. I remember well one daytime MRI or CAT scan on a lower floor. Somehow it did my heart good to see out a large window at the end of one hall the downtown Birmingham skyline beneath a beautiful blue Alabama sky. I had seen that scene often on trips from Tuscaloosa to my North Alabama mountain home. The technician that day who moved me from my bed to the MRI bed was wearing his houndstooth Alabama Crimson Tide ball cap backwards so that the large A on the back was facing me. Roll Tide, I said, smiling. He gave me a thumbs up just before doing the scan. This was not North Carolina. This was Alabama scenery. The next evening, after Rule was there, I awoke from a nap and felt the technician, Miss Alice, doing part 2 of a brain scan she had begun the day before. She stood next to my bed with her machine and moved her stylus or something across the top of my head. I glanced over to see brother number 1 Bobby at the end of my bed. He and Alice were having a conversation. I could not hear his remarks, but Alice was responding with, "Today, welfare would step in. That would be reported." What was he telling her? After she left, I asked Bobby to move closer to my left ear so I could hear what they had discussed. My right hearing aid had got lost in my first ER experience in Georgia. Only my left hearing aid was helping me hear what surely would be reported to welfare today. Bobby told of the time in his life when I was an infant, born in May and he was 8 years old, in which he felt almost overwhelmed with responsibility. By that fall, Mother was back in the cotton patch, and the responsibility of caring for his 4 siblings fell on his shoulders. He also had to keep watering the beans for lunch and to keep wood in the kitchen cook stove. My brother Royce and I were both in diapers. If I became hungry, he had to carry me to Mother in the field to be nursed. Brother number 2, Ronald, probably had to step up and do a little babysitting when Bobby was in the field. I recall the trips to the field with a crying baby when I was 7 and little Judy was about 9 months. I didn't recall any kitchen duties. Somehow we all survived and still have each other today, all except Royce. He died instantly in a motorcycle accident in 1970. Since that day in the UAB intensive care room, I have felt a deeper sense of gratitude to my big brother, number 1, Bobby. But that night in Birmingham, Bobby began to feel bad and decided to get back to North Alabama. I did fine without anyone the rest of the night. I think the word got around that there is no rest for the weary in ICU because brother number 2 canceled his shift for Thursday night. Charles drove over from Louisiana to be with me that night. Another brain scan was done by a young Iranian technician named Reza. I never heard the results, but I guess my surgeon was pleased. "Reza," I said, "wasn't that the Shah's son's name?" "Yes," he answered. "How did you know?" Alan echoed his surprise and said, "How did you know that?" I explained that I had read an article once long ago about the Shah's family. He divorced his first wife because she was sterile and married a younger, beautiful woman who bore him Reza, the crown prince. I felt sorry for Reza. One day he was the crown prince. The next day he was in exile from his homeland after the revolution. It sounded like a fairy tale gone sour when the prince became incognito. The technician assured me that he was not Reza. Alan was assured that my memory was still working, at least the long-term memory. I later thought of another Persian leader who divorced his first wife to marry Queen Esther in the Bible. If I saw Reza again, I planned to mention it, but he never came back. So, the Detour had already provided me with choice time with my brothers, my husband, and my son. I felt honored and special, but hated to be a bother to anyone. My younger daughter was 3 states away. My older daughter, Sharon, was in Auburn dealing with her own health crisis. Sharon had to wait 11 years to become a mom and desperately wanted another child. She had recently experienced 2 miscarriages. At the time of my stroke, she was in her 8th week of a 3rd pregnancy within a year. We all wanted her to take it easy for the baby's sake. The baby needed her more than I did. One day, I could tell from the flow of conversation with family members in the room that all was not well with Sharon. I asked, "Did Sharon lose her baby?" "Yes," someone answered. "She didn't want you to know for fear it would set you back. But God had already prepared me by showing me that I was not in charge of the universe. He was. He could take care of my children with or without me." So the next time I spoke to Sharon, I told that I knew about the baby. Although I couldn't help her or put my arms around her, I could grieve with her. I remember a comment by a mother in the Esther series by Beth Moore. She said she was only as happy as her saddest child. Sharon was my saddest child during that time. One thing that gave me comfort to Sharon in losing the earlier babies was the book Heaven is for Real by Todd Burpo. It relates how a young child told of his visit to heaven and meeting a sister his mother had miscarried before his birth. He had known nothing about that history until he met his sister in heaven. Now Sharon and Louis have 3 children waiting for them there. The last one had a name, Michael if a boy, or Micah if a girl. Alan and I look forward to meeting them as well. She had prayed that her baby would live, but it did not happen. No is an answer, but difficult to receive. Sharon described just how difficult that no was to receive. For a while after the miscarriages, I refused to sing songs at church that describes God as a good father. To me, I felt he had been hurtful in his lack of intervention and in allowing all of the circumstances surrounding my miscarriages. I was quite angry with his rule and care in my life. Slowly, through different ways, God began to impress on me that he was a good and loving father, and that faith doesn't necessarily mean that I will get what I want when I want it. But faith is trusting his character that he always has my best interest at heart and loves me dearly. He does protect and watch over me and only allows pain for my greater good. I can honestly say that I have seen much personal gain come through the sadness of my experiences in infertility. My daytime concerns at the hospital centered around the forced fast the staff had imposed on me. The staff GI thought there was too much gas in my intestines, so he ordered no solid food. Alan saw how weak I was becoming and spoke up on my behalf. At some point I was given a blood transfusion. I remembered Sharon's verse, "He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again." 2 Corinthians 1:10. I was looking forward to being delivered from ICU. Nurse Jill told me that if I could tolerate the packet of potassium in my orange juice, I might get to begin solid food. Once I took potassium through the IV and my arm burned as if fire ants had invaded me. A nurse diluted it somewhat to relieve me. I was becoming as weak as a kitten on IV glucose and water. Jill mixed the potassium packet contents with juice and gave it to me. It was so strong and harsh. My tongue developed scales from it, but I got it down by thinking of happy times at home when Alan took me out for a pancake and orange juice breakfast at McDonald's near our house. I passed the test to begin solid food. Alas, the hospital kitchen was already closed, so I could only get what was in the floor refrigerator, Jell-O and beef broth. My tenure in ICU left me feeling grateful for prayer. I totally related to an account by George Whitefield, telling of a time he almost died in a colonial ICU near Boston, November of 1744, at age 29. He described it so well. My palms were more acute and my weakness much more sensible. The help of another physician was called in. Nothing was wanting that could be necessary. All were officious to attend upon and set up with me. And above all, the dear Redeemer was pleased to give me his presence both to support and compose. Several times I seemed to be breathing my last, but I really believe the prayers of God's people brought me back. Emphasis mine. Some spent a whole night in that exercise, and others were instant with God by day. Oh, what am I? The Lord humble me, reward my friends, and for his dear Son's sake, Grant that I may come out of this furnace like gold tried 7 times in the fire, and that his people may not be disappointed of their hope. Even so, Lord Jesus. Amen. After about a week, my brain surgeon told me, "Congratulations, you graduated from ICU." He had done his job well. What would the stroke hall be like? Was this really happening?